My family has a gruesome history. The genealogy book sits heavy in my hands, its leather binding cracked and brittle, smelling of dust and something else. Something older. Something that reminds me of dried blood and forgotten screams. My fingers trace the faded names, each one a testament to a legacy I never asked for but can never escape. My name is Ezra Pearce. I am the last. The morning light filters through the curtains of our modest suburban home, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. Lilith is in the kitchen, her pregnant belly a gentle curve against her pale blue nightgown. She's humming something, a lullaby, perhaps, completely unaware of the weight of history that pulses through my veins. I should have told her before we married, before we conceived our child. But how do you explain a hereditary nightmare that defies rational explanation? My father, Nathaniel, never spoke directly about the curse. Neither did his father, Jeremiah, or his father before him. It was always in hushed whispers, in sideways glances, in the way older relatives would grow silent when certain names were mentioned. The Pearce family tree was less a record of lineage and more a chronicle of horror. Each generation lost someone, always in ways that made local newspapers fall silent, that made police investigations mysteriously go cold, that made even hardened investigators look away and shake their heads. My great-grandfather, Elias Pearce, was found dismembered in a locked barn, every single bone meticulously separated and arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. No tools were ever found, no explanation ever given. My grandfather, Magnus Pearce, disappeared entirely during a family camping trip. Search parties found nothing. Not a strand of hair, not a scrap of clothing. Just a small patch of ground where something had clearly happened. The earth scorched in a perfect circle as if something had burned so intensely that it consumed everything around it, leaving only a memory of heat. My father, Nathaniel? He was discovered in our family's basement, his body contorted into an impossible position, eyes wide open but completely white. No pupils, no iris, just blank, milky surfaces that seemed to reflect something from another world. And now here I am, the last Pearce, with a wife who doesn't know, with a child growing inside her, unaware of the genetic lottery they've already been entered into. The genealogy book falls open to a page I've memorized 1,000 times. A loose photograph slips out, a family portrait from 1923. My ancestors stare back, their faces rigid and unsmiling. But if you look closely, and I have countless times, there's something else in their eyes. A knowledge. Terrible, suffocating knowledge. Lilith calls from the kitchen. Breakfast is ready, love. I close the book. The eggs grow cold on my plate. Lilith watches me, her green eyes searching, a furrow of concern creasing her forehead. She knows something's wrong. She's always known how to read the subtle tremors in my silence. You're thinking about your family again, she says. It's not a question. I force a smile. Just tired. But tired isn't the word. Haunted, terrified, trapped. My fingers unconsciously trace a small birthmark on the inside of my wrist. A strange, intricate pattern that looks less like a natural mark and more like a symbol. A symbol I've never been able to identify, despite years of research. It's been in every Pearce male's family photo, always in the same location, always identical. Lilith's pregnancy is now in her 7th month. The baby moves constantly, pressing against her skin like something desperate to escape. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I've watched those movements and wondered if it's trying to escape something more than the confines of her womb. The genealogy book remains open on the kitchen counter. I catch Lilith glancing at it, her curiosity barely contained. She knows I'm secretive about my family history. Most of my relatives are dead or disappeared, and the few photographs that remain are locked away in a fireproof safe in my study. Tell me about your great-grandfather, she says suddenly. My hand freezes midway to my coffee mug. There's nothing to tell, I manage. But that's a lie. There's everything to tell. Elias Pearce, the first documented instance of our family's peculiarity. He was a cartographer, always traveling to remote locations, mapping territories no one had ever charted. His journals, the few that survived, spoke of places that didn't exist on any official map. Places with geometries that didn't make sense. Landscapes that seemed to breathe. The last entry, dated December 17, 1889, was a series of increasingly frantic sketches. Impossible architectural designs. Symbols that hurt your eyes if you looked at them too long. And at the bottom, in handwriting that grew more erratic with each line, "They are watching. They have always been watching. The map is not the territory. The territory is alive." Those were his final words. When they found him in that locked barn, his body systematically dismantled like a complex mechanical puzzle. The local sheriff's report read like a fever dream. Bones arranged in perfect mathematical precision. No blood, no signs of struggle, just reorganization. Lilith's hand touches my arm, pulling me back to the present. "Ezra, are you listening?" I realize I've been staring into nothing, my coffee growing cold, the birthmark on my wrist suddenly feeling hot, burning. "I'm fine," I lie, but the curse is never fine. The curse is always waiting, and our child is coming soon. The ultrasound images are wrong, not obviously so, not in a way that would alarm a typical doctor or technician. But I see it, the subtle asymmetries, the impossible angles, the way the fetus's bones seem to bend in directions that shouldn't be anatomically possible. Lilith keeps the images pinned to our refrigerator, a proud mother-to-be displaying her first glimpses of our unborn child. Each time I look, I feel something crawl beneath my skin, something ancient, something watching. Dr. Helena Reyes is our obstetrician. She's been nothing but professional, but I've caught her looking at me, not at Lilith, at me. Her eyes hold a recognition that makes my blood run cold. "Everything is progressing normally," she said during our last appointment. The pause before "normally" hanging in the air like a barely concealed lie. That night, I pulled out the old family documents again. Tucked between brittle pages of the genealogy book, I found a letter. The paper was so old it crumbled at the edges, but the ink remained sharp. Written by my grandfather Magnus, addressed to no one and everyone. "The child always comes. The child has always been coming. We are merely vessels, carriers. The lineage demands its continuation." What lineage? Continuation of what? Lilith sleeps beside me, her breathing deep and even. Her belly rises and falls, the shape beneath her nightgown moving in ways that feel calculated, deliberate. I trace my birthmark again. Under the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, it looks less like a birthmark and more like a map to nowhere, or everywhere. My father Nathaniel's final photographs are stored in a locked drawer in my study. I rarely look at them, but tonight feels different. Something is pulling me toward them, calling me. The photographs are strange, not because of what they show, but because of what they don't show. In each family portrait going back generations, there's a consistent emptiness, a space, always in the same location, as if something has been deliberately erased, removed, but removed before the photograph was even taken. The baby kicks, hard, so hard that Lilith doesn't wake up, but I see her stomach distort, a shape pressing outward, not like a normal fetal movement, more like something trying to push its way out, something trying to escape, or something trying to enter. I close my eyes, but I can still see the map, the territory, the birthmark burning like a brand. Our child is coming, and I am terrified of what will arrive. The old courthouse record sits spread across my desk, a constellation of pain mapped out in faded ink and brittle paper. I've been researching our family history for weeks now, driven by something more than curiosity, something closer to survival. Every Pearce male in the last 5 generations died or disappeared before their 35th birthday. Not a coincidence. Not anymore. My father Nathaniel, gone at 34. My grandfather Magnus, vanished at 33. Great-grandfather Elias, found mutilated at 35. The pattern is too precise to be random. I've collected newspaper clippings, court documents, medical records. Not the dramatic, sensational evidence one might expect, but the quiet, bureaucratic trail of destruction. Police reports with missing pages. Coroner's files with critical information redacted. Insurance claims that never quite add up. Lilith finds me here most nights, surrounded by these documents. She doesn't ask questions anymore, just brings me coffee, watches me with those green eyes that seem to hold more understanding than she lets on. The baby's room is almost ready, she says softly, placing a mug beside me. I look up. The nursery door stands open. Pale yellow walls, carefully selected furniture. Everything perfect. Too perfect. Have you ever wondered, I ask, why some families seem marked by tragedy? She sits down, her pregnancy making the movement careful, calculated. Some people are just unlucky, but I know it's more than luck. Something runs in our blood. Something that doesn't care about love, or hope, or the carefully constructed life we've built. The birthmark on my wrist throbs, not painfully, just present, a constant reminder. I pull out the most disturbing document, a psychological evaluation of my grandfather Magnus, conducted 2 months before his disappearance. The psychiatrist's notes are clinical, detached. Patient exhibits extreme paranoia regarding familial curse, demonstrates intricate delusion of systematic family destruction, fixates on biological determinism, shows no signs of schizophrenia, but persistent ideation of inherited trauma suggests deep-seated psychological mechanisms at play. Inherited trauma. The words echo. What if our family's destruction wasn't supernatural? What if it was something more insidious? A genetic predisposition to self-destruction? A psychological pattern so deeply ingrained that each generation unconsciously recreates the same narrative of loss? Lilith's hand touches my shoulder. Coming to bed? I nod, but my mind is elsewhere. Calculating. The baby is due in 6 weeks. I have 6 weeks to understand what's happening to our family. 6 weeks to break a cycle that has consumed generations. 6 weeks to save our child. If I can. The research consumes me. I've taken a leave of absence from work, my entire study transformed into a makeshift investigation center. Genetic reports, psychiatric evaluations, family medical histories stretching back over a century. Each document another piece of a horrifying puzzle. Dr. Helena Reyes agrees to meet me privately. She's a geneticist specializing in inherited psychological disorders, recommended by a colleague who knew something was unusual about my family history. Her office is sterile, meticulously organized. Nothing like the chaotic landscape of my own research. The Pearce family presents a fascinating case study, she says, sliding a manila folder across her desk. Generational patterns of self-destructive behavior, early mortality, and what appears to be a consistent psychological profile. I lean forward. What profile? She hesitates, professional detachment wavering for just a moment. Extreme risk-taking behavior, persistent paranoia, a documented inability to form long-term emotional connections. Each generation seems to unconsciously recreate traumatic family dynamics. My grandfather Magnus, my father Nathaniel, their lives were a series of broken relationships, isolated existences, careers marked by sudden, inexplicable failures. And me? I'd fought against that pattern, married Lilith, built a stable life, or so I thought. There's something else, Dr. Reyes continues. We've identified a rare genetic mutation. Not something that causes a specific disease, but a variation that affects neural pathways related to threat perception and stress response. She shows me a complex genetic map, chromosomal variations highlighted in clinical blue. In simplest terms, she explains, your family's brain chemistry is fundamentally different. You're neurologically primed for a perpetual state of threat detection. Imagine living with the constant sensation that something terrible is about to happen. Every single moment. I know that feeling intimately. Lilith is 8.5 months pregnant now. The baby could come any day, and all I can think about is the pattern, the curse, the genetic inheritance that seems to hunt my family like a predator. That night I dream, not of monsters or supernatural entities, but of a simple, terrifying truth. What if the real horror is inside us? coded into our very DNA? What if our child is already marked? The contraction started at 3:17 a.m. Lilith's grip on my hand was vice-like, her breathing controlled despite the pain. The hospital room felt smaller with each passing minute, the white walls seeming to close in. Dr. Reyes was there, not our usual obstetrician, but the geneticist who had been studying our case. Her presence felt deliberate, calculated. "Everything is progressing normally," she said, the same phrase she'd used before. But nothing about our family had ever been normal. Hours passed, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the soft rustle of medical equipment. My mind kept circling back to the research, the genetic markers, the documented family history of destruction. At 11:42 a.m., our son was born. A healthy cry pierced the sterile hospital air. Normal, perfectly, wonderfully normal. Dr. Reyes ran her standard tests, blood work, genetic screening. I watched, my entire body tense, waiting for some sign of the curse that had haunted my family for generations. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. Our son, Gabriel, grew strong, healthy. No signs of the psychological fractures that had destroyed my father, my grandfather, our ancestors. No mysterious disappearances. No unexplained tragedies. I submitted every piece of medical documentation to Dr. Reyes. Comprehensive reports, psychological evaluations. Each document a testament to Gabriel's complete normalcy. The genetic markers, I asked her during one of our final consultations, the predisposition to self-destruction? She looked tired, professional. Sometimes, she said, breaking a cycle is possible, not through supernatural intervention, but through understanding, through choice. Lilith found me one night, surrounded by the old family documents, the genealogy book, the newspaper clippings, the medical records that had consumed me for so long. "Are you ready?" she asked. I understood what she meant. That night, I built a fire in our backyard, watched the papers curl and burn, the history of destruction, the weight of inherited trauma, turning to ash. Gabriel played nearby, laughing, innocent, unaware of the darkness I was burning away. For the first time in generations, a Pearce male would live, truly live. The curse was over. The Whitmore estate. As I recount the events that transpired during my visit to the old Whitmore estate, my hands tremble with the effort to type each word. The building, a colossal structure shrouded in ivy and decay, stood isolated on the outskirts of town, its history marred by tales of tragedy and unexplained occurrences. It was on a dare that I, along with 3 friends, decided to explore the estate one fateful night under the guise of proving our courage. The moon, full and imposing, cast eerie shadows through the skeletal branches of ancient trees, setting the stage for what was to become the most terrifying night of my life. As we approached the main entrance, a cold breeze whispered past us, carrying with it the faintest sound of a melody, a music box, perhaps, playing somewhere within the depths of the building. The door, surprisingly, gave way with ease, as if the estate itself was inviting us in. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each more dilapidated than the last. Our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness, and with each step, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the very atmosphere was trying to suffocate us. We decided to split up, a decision I now regret with every fiber of my being. As I wandered through the endless halls, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps and the distant, haunting melody that seemed to follow me. I stumbled upon a grand ballroom, its once magnificent features now tarnished by time. In the center of the room stood a grand piano, its keys moving on their own, playing the melody that had been haunting me since we entered. Frozen in terror, I watched as shadows danced across the walls, not mere reflections of my flashlight, but as if they had a life of their own. The air turned frigid, and I could see my breath as I backed away from the inexplicable scene. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, echoing through the vastness of the room. It called my name, not in malice, but in sorrow, a plea for something I could not understand. In a panic, I fled the room, my heart pounding against my chest, desperate to find my friends and escape the nightmare we had so foolishly walked into. The corridors twisted and turned, leading me further into the bowels of the estate, each turn taking me deeper into despair. It was then that I saw her, a figure at the end of the hall, barely discernible in the dim light. A woman, her dress a tattered remnant of a bygone era, her face obscured by the shadows. She moved towards me, not walking, but floating, her presence sending a chill down my spine that rooted me to the spot. Her voice, when she spoke, was a mere whisper, but it filled the hallway, reverberating off the walls. "Leave this place," she said, her tone mournful, "lest you become part of it, forever trapped within these walls." As she spoke, the air around us began to swirl, the shadows coalescing into forms that were almost human, their whispers joining hers in a cacophony of warnings. The swirling air grew colder, and the shadows that had taken on human-like forms began to advance towards me, their movements slow but deliberate. The mournful whisper of the woman echoed in my head, urging me to flee, yet my legs refused to move, as if the very floor beneath me had turned to quicksand, trapping me in place. I could feel the panic rising within me, a primal fear that clawed at my sanity. The shadows, now mere feet away, were no longer formless. They bore the anguished expressions of souls long tormented, their eyes hollow with despair. Their whispered warnings grew louder, a chorus of voices pleading with me to escape the fate they had suffered. In a desperate bid for freedom, I mustered every ounce of strength I had and broke free from the invisible force that held me. I turned and ran, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and the accursed estate as possible. The hallways, which had previously seemed endless, now twisted and turned in a dizzying maze, the layout changing with every step I took, as if the building itself was alive, its very structure contorting to keep me within its grasp. The melody that had once seemed distant was now a deafening cacophony, the piano keys striking with such force that it felt as though the sound alone could shatter my soul. I stumbled through room after room, each more grotesque than the last, filled with relics of despair and decay. Portraits on the walls depicted scenes of horror, their subjects' eyes following my every move, their expressions twisted in silent screams. In a fleeting moment of clarity amid the chaos, I realized that the estate was not merely a house but a sentient entity, feeding off the fear and despair of those who dared to trespass its cursed halls. The portraits on the walls, I understood with a bone-deep chill, were not mere paintings but windows into the souls it had consumed, their silent screams a testament to their eternal torment. As I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, a chilling realization dawned upon me. The melody was not just a feature of the haunting, but a key to the estate's malevolent consciousness. Each note, each haunting chord, was a thread in the fabric of its dark history, a history woven from loss, betrayal, and unspeakable horrors. In a desperate bid to escape, I found myself in what appeared to be the heart of the estate, back in the ballroom where the air was saturated with a palpable sense of dread. At its center, the source of the melody, an ancient grand piano, its keys moving with frenzied energy, played by unseen hands. Around it, the air shimmered with a spectral light, and within this light, the shadows danced, their forms more defined, more menacing. Realizing that the piano was the anchor, the conduit through which the estate manifested its power, I knew what I had to do. With a resolve born of sheer terror, I approached the instrument, each step feeling like an eternity. The melody grew frantic, as if the estate itself sensed my intention to disrupt its dark heart. Just as I reached the piano, a force unseen struck me, sending me reeling to the ground. The air was thick with the sound of the discordant melody and the whispered pleas of the trapped souls. I fought against the overwhelming force, my every movement a battle against the will of the house. Summoning every ounce of strength, I lunged forward and slammed the piano lid shut, silencing the melody in an instant. The effect was immediate and cataclysmic. A shockwave of energy erupted from the piano, rippling through the estate, shattering windows and cracking walls. The portraits wailed in unison, a symphony of liberation and agony, as the trapped souls within were released, their forms dissipating into the ether. The estate trembled, an architectural beast in its death throes, as the malevolent energy that had sustained it began to unravel. I scrambled to my feet, racing towards the faint light of an exit that seemed suddenly, mercifully, within reach. The structure groaned and creaked around me, the very foundations of the house convulsing in its final moments. I burst through the decaying doors into the cool embrace of the night, just as the estate gave a final, thunderous groan and collapsed inward, a heap of rubble where the once formidable structure had stood. Exhausted, I collapsed on the ground, the adrenaline that had fueled my escape ebbing away, leaving me spent and gasping for breath. As I lay there, staring up at the night sky, the eerie calm that followed the storm of supernatural fury was broken only by the distant sound of sirens, the real world rushing in to reclaim the space once occupied by the Whitmore estate's horrors. The melody, the whispers, the shadows, all were gone, silenced by the destruction of their unearthly prison. Yet, in the quiet that followed, I knew the scars of that night would haunt me forever.